And we kind of missed that when we were in DC, if I'm honest. So coming back here felt like a return to this sort of really, warm and vibrant kind of Balkan culture, which we really love,
Dobar dan I dobrodošli u Tačka Povratka podcast. Prostor u okviru kojeg pričamo priče naših uspešnih povratnika I povratnica, iskustva naših cirkularnih migranata I talenata iz Srbije I inostranstva.
Ambassador Ferguson, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to sit down with us and talk, share some, I would say, hopefully very interesting stories from the past and from actually choosing to be a circular migrant in the first place as part of being, a diplomat. Thank you so much for taking the time and welcoming us to the residency here in Belgrade.
Aurora, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be on the program. Looking forward to chatting.
Can you tell us a bit, and I was, when I was thinking about, the topics that we can talk about, one of the first things was we talked to our returnees and people who are, deciding to shift and move to like a modular way of living and working,
yes.
Splitting time between Belgrade and another city. But for them, it's a choice that is more of like a personal thing. You chose a career that puts you at being a circular migrant for work. Yeah. How did that come about?
Well, I kind of grew up as a bit of a migrant in a way, because my father was a soldier. And so by the time I was 18, I think I'd lived 3 times in Germany, twice in Belgium, twice in Norway, once in Italy, 3 times in England. So we moved every couple of years, and actually I loved it. I think it gave me a really kind of European international perspective on life. I love meeting people from different backgrounds and cultures and countries. And so I kind of grew up always wanting to be a diplomat, really, from a very young age. It didn't hurt that my uncle was ambassador to the British Virgin Islands, and I thought, well, if that's a decent career, if that's a career, that sounds okay by me. But I think the other thing was that as we sort of, well, actually, as I kind of progressed through university, I very much wanted to go into the diplomatic service, and then I didn't get in, aged 18, which was a sort of a bit of a sort of, oh, crikey, what next moment. And I joined the Ministry of Defence for the first 15 years of my career. Again, very much sort of internationally focused, but not quite what I had in mind. And so it was only really quite late on, after I'd done a master's in diplomacy and strategy at LSE, that I finally managed to talk my way into a job as the British ambassador in Bosnia and Herzegovina, my first job as a diplomat. So, in the end I got there, which I guess is a kind of, an example of persistence and not giving up on where I really wanted to go. But I think the seed was sown at a very young age that this was the kind of lifestyle that I just think is really exciting and interesting.
But it felt, I would say, probably for you, it felt also very natural, because when you're exposed to it as a child, there is no context to, there is no different life, right? So
yes.
It's kind of like, that's the life you live, and it's exciting and it makes sense. And I think
I'd never lived anywhere for more than a couple of years, so I was just used to that sense of the new and getting to meet new people, learn new languages. And I think that was always something that I just found really exciting.
But, there is a bit to the story that I think is very interesting for people to, specifically younger people who are thinking about this and kind of like, oh, being an ambassador, there must be like this stellar and amazing career that always worked the way that somebody anticipates it's going to work. So when I heard the first time that you actually got to know when you wanted to get into the diplomatic circles from the first time, I think this importance of no and maybe sort of pushing you to actually get there in time, for me, I think is always a very interesting thing, because I think students, they have this idea that everything, within the sphere of their control, everything is going to work out the way, if you just put in the work, things are going to come my way. And it's not always like that.
No, life isn't like that. And sometimes it throws you a curveball. And I think, I've always taken the view that if something doesn't happen, it's probably for a reason, and you just have to make the best of it. And I've been incredibly lucky in my career. I've had these amazing jobs, initially in the Ministry of Defence, a lot of them, linked to the military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then I was the head of strategy, thinking about how to shape our armed forces for the next 30, 40 years. So I'm not complaining at all. And I learned an enormous amount. But yeah, I think, I always had that sense of, I want to get back to that kind of the path that didn't quite materialize. And, I guess in the end, that sense of determination really, and persistence, and trying to find ways to build that career, paid off in the end.
We're very happy to have you here. So
thank you very much.
Welcome back to the region, I should say. Before we move to this part, I actually wanted to ask this, and this is something that I actually thought about quite a bit. Gearing up for, a career even within the Ministry of Defense, but specifically in, Foreign Office, and sort of being a representative of a sovereign state someplace else. Are there facets to your life that make you a regular person, a father, a friend to other people that you need to leave behind? Specifically, things that, might have been part of your youth, that are part of, let's say, your social calendar, that are just not, you cannot just do them the way that you would want to.
Well, I mean, to some extent, I guess there is that sense slightly of being someone who is a little bit in the public eye, and a little bit, you have that sort of brand of being the ambassador. And I guess, I'm always sort of conscious of that. I don't want to do things that would damage the brand, or particularly not to damage the reputation of the country that I represent. So I think sort of silliness, I guess, is something that you have to be a little bit careful about. But then having said that, I've got 3 young children, so they keep me fairly kind of grounded and fairly silly at the same time. But, I think, like most people, when I was going through university, I had all sorts of, great fun hobbies that I used to love to do, rowing and singing and acting and so on. Some of those have had to sort of just make way for the other things in my life, whether that's the job or whether it's family. But that's just kind of, I think, a common story for most people.
Singing and acting, part of your part of something that we always say probably fueled with a lot of passion.
Yeah.
But do you think that those are the things that also help you prepare for the role that you're doing right now, in a way?
I think acting, it definitely feels sometimes that, being a diplomat is kind of, a good kind of job for failed actors, really, because you're on show a lot of the time. And, and I think being able to kind of hold a stage and give a speech and, maintain people's attention, I guess is part of the job. So I think that grounding of doing a lot of shows, particularly when I was at university at Oxford, was really helpful. Singing too, I guess. I think I've been a performer, I guess, all my life. And I think songs are actually, when I've been learning Serbian, songs are always a really good way to get to know a country as well. Through the lyrics of songs, you learn something not just about that sort of, I spent a lot of time learning how to sort of talk about trade deals or about politics in a language. But it's really when you get into the music and into the lyrics of songs, you learn something about the culture and how people really think and feel. And I think that's also really important.
It's like, I never thought of that, but music, for me at least, was actually a gateway to start learning English. So yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense. It's the culture that really kind of like allows you to really be like, oh, I really want to read. I remember when Harry Potter, I was in elementary school when Harry Potter got out, and we just were very late with translating. So there were already 3 books written.
Oh, really? Yeah. And
only 1 translated. And I was like, okay, I should just start reading in English. And I remember reading the second book with like proper vocabulary next to me, but like a book that you just sort of you need to do it. And I remember it was like, I really need to know what happens next. And
can't wait for the translation.
No. It was like, there are like 3 books already, so I need to know what happens next. So that was my gateway into kind of like actually being forced to learn the language in a way that it's not just regular conversation when you travel abroad, but like to really learn the ins and outs of language. So for me, that was Harry Potter was the gateway thing, and then music and everything else. So
I mean, the number of people here who tell me that they learned that, I would say, God, your English is amazing. Where do you and they learned it from watching MTV, or they learned it from watching, Muchka, Only Fools and Horses, or they learned it from, books like Harry Potter. That kind of, it's a fabulous way to get into.
I mean, I think in a lot of ways, British television has been part of, for a lot of us, just growing up. And it was just the humor, I think, is something that really clicks with us. I don't know if you found that the other way around as well, but for us, I think British humor is something that, for a lot of my friends, it's just what we consider imported humor to be. And for us, it's just kind of, oh, it's so good,
Yeah.
There is an innate understanding because we've been exposed to it since a very early age.
Do you know, it's amazing. I remember when I first arrived in the region, I didn't really, this is in Bosnia 10 years ago, and I didn't know that there was this incredible connection between us, actually. But I really quickly discovered that, we shared the same sense of humor, really, that kind of quite dark, quite kind of cynical sense of humor. But I remember I was living in Banja Luka for a few weeks to learn Serbian, and I looked out the window and there was a Peckham pub, and I thought, what on earth is that doing in Banja Luka? And then I learned about this connection with, Only Fools and Horses was one, but also Monty Python. I was thinking, which, I would have thought is quite uniquely British, but it really resonates here. So my experience is actually that when Serbs and Brits get together, we find we have an enormous amount in common, and in particular, we laugh at the same things, and that's always a really good basis for a relationship.
I always had this moment of trying to explain to people who've never been to Kafana, trying to say, have you ever been to a pub?
Yes.
But like a proper local pub, with
Yeah.
really good food, really good music, rowdy atmosphere.
Absolutely.
People are, and you're like, yeah. I was like, that's Kafana.
That's it.
It's Serbian way of it, but
Yeah.
The context is so similar.
No, it feels very familiar.
Yeah, it feels very familiar. Good. I think it's interesting, and picking up on the things that you said, being somebody who's been circulating ever since actually very young age. Is there a part of that is actually challenging on a personal level, and kind of like apart from saying, hey, this is very interesting and it's part of the work, and there are a lot of added values. What's like a downside?
Yeah, there's a lot of upside, but there is a downside. I think when you leave, you lose people, and that's got better these days because now we have Facebook and WhatsApp, and it's much easier to stay in touch. But growing up, I was lucky in that kind of strange British way. I went to a boarding school in England, so actually I was at the same school for 5 years in a row, which was fantastic because I made really, really good friends there who I'm still in touch with. But otherwise, I think if you're just staying in a country for a couple of years and then moving, it can be quite difficult and quite disruptive, particularly for kids. So I'm very conscious of that with my kids who already lived in 4 different countries, and they're only young. So.
Yeah, that's a challenge. But I think it's also part of. I think the challenge always comes with an opportunity, and that is learning different cultures, different languages, being exposed to.
Exactly.
I think it also.
And I think the upside definitely outweighs the downsides. My kids, I think it's just, I love to see how kind of free of prejudice they are. They just take people as they find them. They don't come with any baggage. They're used to people from all around the world of all different, religions or skin colors, whatever. They're just friends, and I love that. I love that kind of international perspective.
Your brain gets wired a bit differently in those scenarios.
Yeah.
From the perspective of someone who sort of have been looking, and if we look at the region, I think that's maybe also relevant, but Serbia in particular, for people who are circulating with people who've came back from the UK here to Belgrade, what has been your experience in how they shaped the local community? What was the added value for them being here, and sort of bringing maybe other facets to what learning in the UK brings back to Serbia?
Yeah, it's interesting because the UK isn't the number one destination for Serbs to go and live or study abroad, particularly. But actually, there are a lot of people who have, and I've met lots of different people. And there's an incredible community of people out there. You're Achieving Scholar. That's one group of people where there are around 300 Achieving Scholars now. And I think that those kind of networks and the kind of talents and skills that they contain can be really, really powerful. When I was in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we ran a thing called the Embassy Fellowship, where we basically went out and kind of talent spotting people in politics or business or the media or the arts and civil society. And we sent them over to the UK, for sort of 3 weeks to learn all about the UK, but also just to gel together as a network. And again, it was incredibly powerful for us actually as an embassy, as a kind of network of people we could engage with to understand what was happening or to try and influence kind of different outcomes. So my experience is that people who have studied in the UK, generally have a really positive perception of the UK. Usually it's been a fantastic experience, and they carry that with them. And I think that's great. I'd love to see more Serbs traveling to and studying or working in the UK and then coming back here. but I think very often, they're really talented people. Just last week, we organized a big technology trade conference in Novi Sad at the Technology and Science Park there. And we brought over kind of 20 ICT and AI companies from the UK with the British Serbian Chamber of Commerce. But there were loads of people there who were from Serbia. But again, many of them had studied and worked in the UK. And I think particularly in that kind of tech sector, which is booming in Serbia now, it's also booming between the UK and Serbia. We're now like ranked third for trade and services with Serbia. A lot of that's because of trade in the digital economy. And a lot of that is built on people who know the UK really well because they've studied there or they've worked there and they've come back to Serbia and they've started to, got their startup running and so on. So that's really exciting to see. And, I'm always meeting new people who I didn't know were out there. And that's really fun.
I think I think the reason why we started the podcast is there are so many people who do amazing work, but they're just below the radar in terms of they don't feel any need to talk about it in the media. They're like, I'm doing my own work and I have this amazing group of people. A lot of expats also attract other expats, to become part of the group because it's a similar way of thinking. Or people who've been just wired a bit differently. When you travel abroad and you come back, that's always the case.
Exactly.
And I think this is where it's the interesting part for us. It's kind of like uncovering these stories and kind of like understanding better what's the algorithm behind, why did you go? What happened? Why did you come back? And I think, as you said, maybe in several different sectors, but I would say across the board, people who've been studying in the UK have received not just a positive experience of studying there, but also learning about the culture and maybe even recognizing bits and pieces of our own culture that is so through humor, music, movies. It just resonates with us,
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And, I think, as I say, whatever aspect really, there's not much difference between Serbs and Brits, which is why, for most of the last 200 years, we've had a really close relationship. With some peaks and troughs in it, but overall, actually, again, when Serbs and Brits are together, it tends to be a kind of a really easy pairing, and that's rooted in lots of different stuff. But I think it's helpful because what is said about the UK and Serbia is not always that positive. So actually, the more people who can come and experience what we're really like, rather than what your tabloids might say we're like, is a good thing.
I mean, I think the moment you start talking to people, it gets away from this whole narrative and tabloids and everything. I mean, tabloids in the UK are also kind of... And here, it's always kind of like it's the culture we're going to not be a part of because learning from the experience of people who actually lived abroad.
Exactly.
Know friends and know people, went to the local pub, know how well they've been received. I think there's this... You bring that back home and then you look for this kind of connections locally. That's at least the experience that we had with Returning Point, which I'm actually quite happy to say we've had, support of the project by WFD from the very start. Yeah. And, even a circular migration project in Serbia has been something that I would say very naturally geared towards connecting to locals who understand the importance of exchange, specifically between the UK and Serbia. So thank you for the support in that regard.
That's a pleasure. No, I think it's great. Clearly a lot of people have had a hand in Tačka Povratka, but I'm really pleased that Westminster Foundation for Democracy is one of those. And again, I think one of the things that we really try and focus on as an embassy is to improve the reputation of the UK in Serbia and improve the reputation of Serbia in the UK. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is done by individual people just living their lives and, making contacts and changing perceptions of people they meet. So I think those individual stories are all really important. And when you add them up, they can be really powerful.
The power of adding up. What would you say are the embassies currently buzzing about when it comes to like the new projects where this kind of bilateral exchange is something that, or let's say we talk about this as in building bridges, right?
Yeah.
What's the next thing that's going to help establish these bridges in a maybe more meaningful way or in a more profound way?
Well, I mean, we always have a lot going on. I mean, right now, actually, we're preparing for our big King's birthday party, which will be in the garden out there, where hopefully we'll have, well, I don't know, well over 1,000 people, which is a great opportunity just to bring people together and in this case, to dance to a Beatles tribute band. So that should be fun. But in terms of kind of bigger stuff that reaches further, I mean, we, for a number of years now, with the British Council, have been running a project called 21st Century Schools. And and one of the things it did was really train, actually at one point, every child of primary school age in Serbia and the wider region in digital skills. And we're now kind of updating and expanding that into AI, teaching kids in AI, kids in schools how to use AI kind of safely, but how to get the benefits out of it, and also teaching their teachers. Some of whom are a bit nervous about this, and making them comfortable with it, because I think it's going to be incredibly important in the future. One other really exciting project we've got on the moment, actually, which we just announced last week at this trade conference, is a big program with Hughes Hall at Cambridge University called the Ignition Program. And what this is that 15 startups and innovators in Serbia will be able to join the 6-month program. Some of it's online, and it's about mentoring and support, and about really trying to help them to develop their ideas, work out how to plug into and change and improve the ecosystem around them, in Serbia in this case. But there's also a part of it which is actually in Cambridge. And people can apply by the end of this month. And so we're going to try and let as many people as we can know about that, because I think it's a really fantastic opportunity. And also in this kind of space, we have another program, which is again run by the British Council, called Cyber, which is really trying to support more women and girls to get into cybersecurity as a profession. So again, 15 places for people to apply to actually get a kind of recognized, accredited qualification recognized by the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre in cybersecurity. So we've got lots going on, particularly actually in this digital sector now, which to me, again, is really exciting, because I think what I'm trying to build with Serbia is a much more kind of modern and positive and forward-looking relationship. And I think this part of the relationship is exactly that.
But I mean, this is also an opportunity for people who always had an idea that they want to test their knowledge and skills and maybe expand and do that in the UK. This might be a really good gateway for that, because if we're talking about 15 startups, for some young people who are part of the program, that's actually going to be transformational on every level.
Yeah, I mean, the UK is really the sort of digital capital of Europe, and we have $1 trillion tech market. So I think, hopefully it's a really exciting opportunity for young Serbian entrepreneurs to kind of plug into that and learn from it, and then kind of apply some of that here in Serbia, because what we really want to do is support Serbia and the development of its economy. Yeah,
I think also the fact that those are the people who are actually developing their startups here.
Yeah.
So it's the knowledge that they get abroad and kind of like expanding the network and understanding, and then bringing that back into the local ecosystem, I think is really, really important. And for us, I would say, as Tačka Povratka, I think the mentality of being able to offer people opportunities to go abroad is really where, for us, it's the change in the narrative. Because back in the day, there's always been this notion of, once you leave the country, you're never coming back.
Yeah.
Or if you come back, that means you failed. And we were like, that's not how things are. There's so many smart, successful people doing amazing things here. Okay, let's show that. That's why we started a podcast in the first place. But also, it's not a bad thing for people to leave. Yes. It's bad if they leave without an idea of what they can do when they come back. That's where we miss out on opportunity. But the purpose of these programs, and I say this as somebody who's been a proud achievement scholar for 10 years now, I think it just stays with you. It's not just I've been there for like a 1 year. You become a member of the achievement community and you stay achiever for the rest of your days. It's kind of like, it's just a narrative of being able to promote that in the right way. And I would like to go back to the topic of achievement shortly, because I think it's one of those well-established programs, but at the same time, I think talking about it all the time, I think is really important. I actually get surprised when I hear that there are people who are interested in studying in the UK and haven't heard of the Achievement Scholarship. So I always find it very important to talk about it in, wherever you can. What has been like for the embassy, and as somebody who's maybe observed this not just from the perspective of what happens in Serbia, but Bosnia as well, how do you look at achieving and the community it builds?
Well, I mean, governments don't always do everything right, but I think this achieving is an area where the British government has done something really right. And I think what's really special about achieving is it's not about us taking talent from Serbia. Businesses do that, and obviously we're delighted when talented people want to come and work in our economy and help us to grow. We're also delighted if they then want to come back to Serbia and contribute here. But I think what achieving does is it offers an opportunity for young, smart people to come and study for a master's degree in the UK completely free at, potentially at one of the world's top universities. You were at Cambridge. And really the only condition is that they then come back to Serbia. And I think what's kind of enlightened about that from a government perspective is that actually what we're investing in is a relationship with Serbia down the line, because what we're trying to identify is people who have the potential to be leaders in their spheres. And I think it's, if you look around the world, the Achieving alumni, includes Nobel Prize winners and presidents and prime ministers and generals and you name it. I mean, and it can be a fantastic way into a country for British diplomats like me. So, and that's certainly the case here in Serbia. We've been running for a long time now in Serbia. There are over 300 alumni. It's growing by about 10 every year. And young people are going and studying at fantastic universities. I think there were two at Cambridge last year where you were, but in London and then Edinburgh and you name it. Around.
LSE as well.
LSE, where I did my master's, exactly. Not enough at Oxford, I have to say, which is where I did my first degree, but we need some more of that.
It's a tough school to get into.
But no, I think it's, for me, it's a really fantastic thing. It's a pure good that we can offer Serbia and talent in Serbia. And it is a long-term contribution to our relationship with Serbia. And that for me is a kind of really altruistic and positive program that I love to be involved in.
Achieving is here to stay, right?
Totally. 100%.
I think that's really important because I know people who are graduating now or soon to be graduating maybe in a year or so, and who already have their eyes set on this opportunity. But I think what's really important is you actually have to work for 2 years after you graduate to sort of get the understanding of...
Find your feet. And yeah.
But I think for a master's degree, specifically in the UK, where you can actually go for a very specific and tailor-made program, that it's really in the field that you're interested in.
Yeah.
It's so important to do at least 2 years in practice to be able to kind of really understand where you want to specialize in.
Yes.
Because I think this is where the added value is, because then you're not bringing just the network and the people and the experience, but you're also bringing knowledge. And I think this is where then it's really transformative on the way back. At least that's how I was back in the day. And when you talk to other achievers from all around the world who studied in Cambridge as well, and who were like, I've been working on this project for 5 years, and I thought this is a good time for me to take a year off and go and specialize in an area that I want to be an expert in when I come back. I think this is where the transformation really kicks in, or at least that's the experience that I had. With
I think I'm sure that's right. I think once you've been working on something or in an area for a while, as you say, you start to know exactly where your interests lie, but also, and then just having that opportunity to step out of work and just focus on really thinking deeply and studying deeply. It's a real amazing thing. So, and I think achieving when it works well, should be it's designed to be an accelerant to someone's career. So rather than just time out, it's really designed to say you come back as an expert in your field. And with a global network of people around the world, and in your home country as well. And so, I'd kind of recommend that everyone has a look at it. If they're remotely interested in doing a master's degree in the UK, they should certainly be looking at that. There are other schemes as well, like PEXIM, that's has scholarships, people studying Cambridge specifically. It's achieving is a fantastic thing.
I think there's the local community needs to support as well. And I think this is where PEXIM really stands out as a local initiative that actually supports for people to go and come back with this very same idea. You're obligated to come back and contribute to the local society because that's why you got the funding for. And I think it's the idea that sending people with an idea that they will be coming back and contributing significantly to what they're about to do. For us, at least as a project, I think it's probably the reason why we were very motivated last year to give one of the scholarships and actually fundraise first. That's also an undertaking.
Yeah, it was brilliant. Yeah,
to fundraise for a scholarship and to actually send one amazing girl to study in Cambridge and MPhil in data intensive science. People who already have an idea of what kind of PhD they're gonna do when they come back. Yeah. For me, it's always, I think, amazing to see these young people who have an idea of how they want to transform the local society. And I think this is where Achieving is so beautifully aligned with people who have this kind of desire. But do you also see Achieving, or let's say the group of expats that came back from the UK, as a factor for transformation of the local society in more ways than, just supporting other people to join on the path and sort of be, new ambassadors?
I think so, because I think, part of the event, and again, I mentioned the fellowship we used to run in the embassy, and really, it was quite short. It was only 3 weeks, but we tried to expose them to how our government works from kind of national level to local level, how our media works by visiting the BBC or others, how our courts work and so on, just kind of exposing the way the UK system functions. And the UK is ranked second in the world for soft power. And that's not really because of the Beatles or Only Fools and Horses. It's actually because of the strength of our institutions, some of which are 1,000 years old, and that breeds trust and confidence in investors or and others. And I think people who come and study in the UK for any period of time or live in the UK, feel that they kind of learn how our system works, and I think they can bring that with even if they're studying data science or whatever it might be. They're getting at broader exposure to just a different country and how it operates. And hopefully there's some goodness that they can absorb from that and bring it, there's lots of things I'm sure that they'll look at us and think, don't know why they do that. But where there's goodness, hopefully that's something they can bring back to Serbia and use it to contribute to the development of society here.
I mean, I hope, because for me, the changing factor going to universities such as Cambridge, but Oxford, it's a very similar experience, I would say. You're exposed to traditions that been established like 600 years ago and are still functioning.
Yes.
For me, that's kind of like, it's crazy to think that there is such a longevity to places that have managed to secure and I would say preserve that tradition as a way of, I would say as a strength compared to, a lot of other places that are shifting all the time.
Yes.
And at the same time stay relevant and modern, which I think is, people don't think about in terms of tradition being something that also supports modern way of thinking. But for me, experience of a UK university was exactly that. It's the tradition that is deeply rooted that actually supports the modern way of thinking and for things to be looked at differently. Yeah,
I mean, we're lucky, right? I mean, we're an island that hasn't been successfully invaded since 1066. So, we've had that ability to develop, whereas, if you happen to be situated on the confluence of the Danube and the Sava, it's, life can be a bit tougher.
Sure.
So, we've had that kind of uninterrupted ability to develop those institutions, develop the traditions, but also to build on and modernize them. And I think, that's where the UK, where our strengths lie. I think it is in that deep sense of history and rooting in institutions that we have, have a real pedigree to them. But also that kind of restless global perspective that means that we're always looking outside and, we're not insular. We trade globally, we travel globally, and we're always trying to learn and listen to others.
I think that's listening as a lesson is something that when I was teaching at university was something that students I would tell them being a good listener makes you a really good lawyer. You need to listen to the people around you to be able to understand what the context of the problem is and then approach and try to solve it. But to echo this, one part of, I would say, being a diplomat in Serbia comes probably with not only just like a set of challenges, but also I would say a set of opportunities apart from meeting people. Was there anything that maybe compared to Bosnia as a place where you've been ambassador before, I would assume there have been a lot of similarities, but also some differences. Was there like a cultural shock that you experienced when you came to Belgrade?
Not really a cultural shock. I think it was because I'd lived in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I think the culture is very similar and familiar. But it was a change because we'd been in America for the 4 years in between. And America was, it was fascinating. We were in Washington, D.C. for 4 years. And, it was really interesting to be there. It was during the time of COVID and, President Trump and then the transition to Biden and so on. So it was, politically and, everything in every other way, kind of, fascinating moment. But it was a very different culture, and it felt particularly in DC, people get up very early in the morning, they go to bed very early, and so on. It was very much kind of, what's the right way to say it? It's live to work, right? Whereas, we'd come from Sarajevo, which was very much about working to live, and much more sort of heart than head, I guess, in the way that people approach life. And we kind of missed that when we were in DC, if I'm honest. So coming back here felt like a return to this sort of really, warm and vibrant kind of Balkan culture, which we really love. We loved our time in Sarajevo. We have great friends there. Our youngest daughter was born there, naša mala Sarajka. And so coming back here just felt, my son on our very first day, we were walking into town. He said, Dad, it just feels like we've come home. Culture shock is something that lots of diplomats experience, and it can be quite challenging. Coming back to Serbia felt like a return to something that was really positive.
It's amazing to hear, but I also think that you've been introduced to the Balkan mentality early on, so that for you it was there was so many.
Yeah, I had some learning to do the first time around.
Yeah, but on that note. Is there a book, and we asked this in a bit of a different context because we actually asked what's the book that you've given to a biggest number of your friends, but maybe, being an ambassador, is there a book that you would recommend for people considering, getting into diplomacy as, as part of their calling in the future?
Well, talking about books I give, there's some great books. There's a book by Professor Slobodan Markovic on British-Serbian relations, and there's a great book by Louisa Miller about Flora Sands, who was the first he volunteered as a soldier in the Serbian army during the First World War, and was the first officer in the Serbian army, the first woman officer. But I think, as a diplomat, I guess, I try and read a lot, but mainly about the countries I'm in rather than sort of theory of diplomacy. But when I was studying diplomacy, I read some really interesting books, and Henry Kissinger's Diplomacy, I think, is still a really good, introduction to the sort of, the diplomacy as it really is, which is not just a life of cocktail parties and, or as it can be, right? I mean, really, it's about trying to support your country's interests in a world which is driven by other countries with their interests. And, that was written 30 years ago now. But he was talking about, the Cold War and, state-on-state rivalries, which, when I guess, sort of disappeared for a while, but are now back with a vengeance. So I think, to try and understand the world as we see it now, with growing competition between big countries and, strong leaders, I think Kissinger's a really good introduction.
Oh, that's an interesting one, because I think it's very interesting to see how books that have been written 30 or 40 years ago are becoming relevant again for exactly the way they've approached certain topics. History, there is always something to learn out of history.
Yes. What do they say? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Rhymes.
Yeah.
And to maybe end on a very light note, but an important one. As you know, Balkan people, Serbians in particular, are very proud of their cultural heritage and, the way we drink our coffee to the way we eat our food.
Absolutely.
What has been your staple, or, what has been the food for you, or maybe even bits of culture in the way we do things that resonated very with you, and or maybe something that you will, take with you wherever the next post may be? Ako želite, ovo možete da kažete možda i na srpskom.
Može. Pa prvi dan kad smo stigli u Srbiju pre 1.5 dana, moja supruga Caroline i ja smo postavili pitanje u deci, šta želite da radite prvi dan u novoj zemlji. I Henry i Tessa, naše najstarije dece, koji su se setili životu u Sarajevu i onda su bili u Americi 4 godine, oni su rekli, pa zašto pitanje? bez sumnje idemo na ćevapi. Po ćevapi. I za nas, to je bilo kao suštinska hrana u Srbiji. I naš najomiljenije, i kad imamo gost, moj brat je bio ovdje sa nama prošlog vikenda, i prve što smo uradili jeste da išli smo na Kalemegdan i išli smo na ćevapi. Pa malo je kliše, ali za nas to je, imam malu decu i za njih posebno to je kao srž Srbije.
Ćevapi su fenomenalna hrana i rekao bih jedan možda naših najboljih kulturnih ambasadora za neke stvari. Da li bismo sada u ovom delu mogli da dobijemo možda kratku najavu programa koji ambasada radi, a koji ste najavili na konferenciji prošle nedelje?
Ignition program je rezultat partnerstva Univerziteta u Cambridgeu i Britansko-Srpske privredne komore. 15 startupova i inovatora iz Srbije će biti uključeni u 6-mesečni sertifikovani program usavršavanja. Program podrazumeva mentorisanje i podršku, sve u cilju razvoja praktičnih ideja koje obogaćuju startup ekosistem i ekonomiju upravo u Srbiji. Konkurs je otvoren do kraja juna i više informacije može se pronaći na društvenim mrežama @UK in Serbia. Naša Achieving stipendija je izuzetna prilika za mlade ljude da studiraju potpuno besplatno za postdiplomske studije na univerzitetu po svom izboru u UK-u, gdje imamo neko od najboljih univerziteta na svetu. Jedini uslov je da se po dobijanju diplome vrate u Srbiju i da svoje nove ideje, kontakte, iskustva iskoriste za društveni napredak ovdje u Srbiji. Achieving nije samo učenje, kao što vi znate. Važan dio programa je uživanje u bogatim kulturnim, sportskim sadržajima, a zatim i povezivanje sa alumni mrežom, koji u Srbiji broji više od 300 talentovanih ljudi.
Ambasadore, mnogo vam hvala.
Hvala vama.
I'll do the outro in Serbian because now we switched to the Serbian side of things. Hvala vam mnogo na odvojenom vremenu i na najavi nekih, ja bih rekao, jako uzbudljivih programa. Hvala vam i na tom što ste podelili neka svoja životna iskustva. Ja se zapravo baš radujem da vidim kako će ovaj razgovor na malo drugačijem formatu i ovaj malo drugačijem settingu za nas odjeknuti kod nas na društvenim mrežama i zapravo se jako radujem da i mi čujemo povratne informacije ljudi koji će delove vaše priče prepoznati kao svoje.
Hvala vama na pozivu i bilo mi je drago da razgovaram s vama. Želim vam puno sreće.